Hey everyone, it's Jamie. Welcome back to my channel. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of dressed as a vampire. Ooh, spooky. Anyways, today what I wanted to do was, I kind of wanted to do I don't want to call it a follow-up, but another video related to what's currently my most popular video. So for those of you who have not seen it, my current most popular video here on this channel is my video on the Sims 4 werewolf game pack concept video. And what it was is, for those who haven't seen it, I just kind of broke down what I would like to see in a werewolf game pack. And you know, this video is my most received, best received video so far. It has the most views. So there's definitely a niche audience out there looking for this kind of content. And one viewer, James Seymour, if you're watching, thank you for commenting on that video. But in the discussion him and I were having down in the comments, he asked me to do a video where I talk about, you know, fairies and more occults like zombies, dragons, genies, you know, things we got in the past that we don't quite have yet in The Sims 4. I am gonna be honest, I'm not going to be talking about dragons today, so I do apologize, James. But I did go back and look at a bunch of other occults we got, and I think I'm going to talk about them here. So what I'm going to do is go down with each occult that I've researched a little bit about, talk about maybe their interactions in past Sims games, and at the end of the video, I will talk about what kind of packs I would like to see them in, as well as when I go through each specific occult. I'll also talk about what I would like to see in the Sims, or also some things that I just have some concerns about. So let's jump right into this video, everyone. To start off, we're going to start off with Jinn, also known as genies. So genies were originally introduced in The Sims Living Large, and you know, they can grant wishes, but you can't play as one. And you know, there isn't that much interactions with them. They're just kind of there. They grant wishes, you know. Then later in The Sims 2, genies arrived with free time. Genies can grant 3 wishes in this game and then disappear. They vanish. When you try to add them into your household or change their cult type, it actually, fun fact, would corrupt your game, so that's really fun. In The Sims 3, genies got a much needed makeover in the sense that genies were added with the pack Showtime. Don't really know how that relates, but whatever. And they were these kind of NPCs that your Sims could meet, and your Sims could even become one. These NPCs could also be added to your household, as well as you may have one of your wishes be that they become human. These, there's a little bit more interactions with them, and this is the first time genies can be male or female. So I did a lot of research, and I kind of realized I have some issues with how genies work in the Sims franchise. Number one, they're often colored like an inhuman color, like magenta or blue or something. And I'm pretty sure this idea really comes from Disney's Aladdin, and I think that's what most people think of now when they think of genies. You know, whatever. We can't change that. That's the fact. Sorry, I'm going to take these out. Hard time talking. The word genie also is the anglicized version of the word jinn. So jinn are these supernatural creatures that originally come out of pre-Islamic Arabian cultures and societies, and from those mythologies. In pre-Islamic times, jinn aren't bound to any kind of lamps or any kind of containers, you know, jars, whatever. And they don't necessarily grant wishes. They do have some kind of magical abilities, but rather they're these kind of part spirit, part human creatures that aren't inherently good or bad, but you know, they can be used for either. And they're often associated with, during this time, kind of Arabian witchcraft, as witches would be able to conjure them. They're not on the same level as like pagan gods of the Arabian area, but because they don't have like the same kind of religious cults, and like I said, they're not fully immortal because they're part human, part spirit. I couldn't really find out if they just like could live forever but would be susceptible to death, or if they were like not susceptible to like death but would eventually just die. I think that might also just maybe depend on the story. They do have these supernatural powers. Like in some stories, they're able to turn into animals, and often associated with like donkeys and snakes. They're often, like I said before, associated with witchcraft a lot, especially like Arabian witchcraft. And it can be seen in some stories from like this early mythology period that they can be tricksters. However, we see after the introduction of Islam into the Middle East, there is a kind of change that jinn go through. One notable change is they become kind of blended with kind of other spirits that are seen in both kind of Christian and Jewish traditions as well. They begin to also be viewed as a creature that is created by Allah, and just like mankind in the Quran, mankind and jinn are given the ability to, you know, of free will, and be able to choose to be good or evil, and often it's seen that they're seduced by the Islamic devil Iblis. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And, you know, they can be seduced into doing evil if they're seduced by this devil figure. There's a wide range of stories involving jinn, and, you know, a lot of them don't really involve, you know, granting wishes, and a lot of them I feel like kind of fall in the same tradition of like werewolves or vampires, in the sense that there is some contradiction in these different stories. You know, you'll get one version of kind of like how a jinn should act in one story, and then another in a different, so it's kind of hard to really tell like what a jinn is supposed to be if you're kind of getting as many stories as possible. In the story 1001 Nights, also known as Arabian Nights, we actually have a few different stories involving jinns, and there's actually two very prominent ones. The first one we're going to talk about is The Fisherman and the Genie. And this is a story about a fisherman who pulls a lamp. In some versions it's a jar, some kind of container, but he pulls this lamp out of the ocean, and it has a seal of Solomon on it. And it's believed in through the Abrahamic religions that Solomon had some kind of like supernatural army at some point, in this version an army of jinn, and that he put these jinn into these containers and threw them in the ocean to trap them for whatever reason. So the fisherman pulls one out and releases a jinn, and after some kind of like back and forth, the jinn decides to, you know, be helpful. He doesn't grant wishes, but what he does do is he leads the fisherman, for, you know, being kind and releasing him, to a body of water where there's like some really exotic fish that the fisherman can catch, and they're very, you know, profitable. And because of this, he becomes very well off, becomes very, you know, friendly with the king, and is able to go on and you know, be a successful and wealthy person. So, you know, one strike for good jinn, I guess. Well, the jinn also threatens to kill him at one. They're complicated. Another story from Arabian Nights is actually the inspiration for Disney's Aladdin, and that is Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, in which this story we have our friend Aladdin, and he kind of gets, you know, tricked into some scenarios similar to the movie, and, you know, he finds himself in the possession of a genie, a jinn. And in this version of the story, there's two different jinn. There's a less powerful one that's trapped in a ring, and then a more powerful one trapped in an oil lamp, that they both are released by rubbing the items. One thing to note in this version is that jinn do grant wishes when they're summoned out of their containers. And in this, we see that the jinn, because they're the lesser one and the more powerful one, depending on which one grants wishes, depends how, you know, much more powerful and lasting it is. And in this one, Aladdin has to, you you know, or he uses the more powerful one to get, you know, what he wants, then it's taken from him, and he uses the less powerful one plus his like kind of like wit and cunningness to, you know, get everything back. But you know, in this one, there are no limits on wishes. It's not like the 3 wishes rule. I have a feeling Disney added that just because the idea of just having unlimited wishes probably, you know, like for a story, I don't think is the most interesting. And you know, outside of this story, there aren't too many examples of jinn granting wishes, but it's not unheard of. It's just not the most common. But however, it has become the most popular kind of version of genies here in, you know, the Western world. Like I mentioned before, genie is the anglicized version of jinn, and they seems with that conversion from, you know, that pre-Islamic language to English, that there were some major changes in how jinn worked. Jinn, another thing to remember about jinn, or to think about, is in the stories themselves, they aren't ever depicted as being, or they're never described as looking anything other than human. They look like humans, they're able to use magic, and they're part spirit. I know some Islamic illustrations do depict them looking like colored demons, maybe with some horns, maybe make them blue or whatever. But I have a feeling this was mostly done just to help them stand out from like an illustration-wise, like an artistic-wise version, because it could probably get complicated, like which one's supposed to be Aladdin, which one's supposed to be the jinn, especially if the image isn't, you know, fully showing, you know, what the jinn can do. But, you know, the stories often depict them as looking like humans. And, you know, once again, even in this, you know, post-Islamic world, you know, jinn aren't really seen as being immortal still. They're just kind of part human. And that's kind of like where my research wrapped up, or not right. We're going to get a little bit into some other research, but this is kind of the point of my research where it's like, so how are we going to incorporate jinn/genies into The Sims 4? Because I think it comes up, one question to come up is, what do we call them? Do we call them the anglicized version genie, or do we call them jinn? I think another thing is, how are we going to depict them? I personally don't love the idea of making them blue, magenta, or whatever. I wonder maybe if it would be better off if they have a Q form kind of system, similar to like aliens, vampires, and mermaids. But also, I'm not really sure if you should be able to make one and create a sim. Another thing to think about is since there aren't too many stories of them actually living in or being trapped into like objects, my wonder is, are we going to have them in objects? Are we going to have a limitation to wishes? Some other things to think about are we just going to do lamps, or are we going to also get rings, maybe some other containers? I'm also really worried about depicting them in a way that would not feel fair to the cultures that still like actively believe in them. In 2012, it was reported that 86% of Moroccans and 84% of people in Bangladesh actually still believe in jinn. I don't know to what degree they believe in them. I don't know if it's like here in America where like a large part of the population believe in ghosts. But also, I would say there's a cultural difference between ghosts and jinn. I wouldn't say they're like, it's a one-to-one comparison. I think another thing to point out here is in Egypt, it was reported that 48% of Egyptians believe that, or 48% of Egyptians who suffer from sleep paralysis believe that their sleep paralysis was caused by an evil jinn. So it's like not only that like jinn are believed in these cultures, but like they're believed to have some kind of effect still. It seems, in my opinion, like not like different than like how we still believe in ghosts or witches. It feels a little bit more culturally specific, I guess you could say. And the reason I'm worried is because here in the West, we often depict genies as either like goofy, as seen in like the Disney movie, or we depict them like very hypersexualized women. Or if there's anything I think we could do, we could really draw from that rich history. We could maybe still do the wishing, we could even do the objects. And I was wondering also if there could be some kind of system in place where maybe their wishes don't always come true, or as you would think they should. It could maybe be like a 50% success rate, and like it could go wrong, kind of like similar to the wishing well that came with the romantic garden pack. Like I think they could work maybe similar to that, where there's like a roll of the dice that the game throws to figure out like if this is going to go in your favor or kind of like reverse on you, and you know, be a problem. And I think maybe those odds can change if you like befriend the genie / Jim. If you like have a good relationship, a bad relationship. I think maybe even, you know, think about other pack, like cross pack compatibility. Like what is your reputation if you have the get together. Not get together, that's get famous, I'm sorry. So, you know, I think there's some things we could think about here. And if we can have them, I don't really see them having like a UI system similar to spellcasters or vampires. I see them working more like mermaids or aliens, in the sense that they have like some menu options you can click from. And these could be things like transforming, granting wishes, doing little trickster things, you know. And that's because I don't see a system really working well. I know if they really went off of Aladdin and the wonderful lamp, they definitely could maybe work in some UI system, because there definitely was a weaker and a stronger genie. But also I'm wondering if that could just, if they want to do something like that, if they could give a skill maybe. The genie skill, I don't know. How also would you stop that from like everyone having it? I don't know. Moving on to the next one. So in The Sims 3, with the Supernatural pack, we got fairies. And I'm gonna be honest, I never really cared for fairies. I never really played with them. But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna take the time to consider them. That does mean I think I'm gonna have less knowledge of how they worked in past games, just because I had less interest in them, and I do apologize. But I did my research, so I can bring that to the table. Fairies, from what I do vaguely remember about them and from what I've read online, in The Sims 3, fairies had some special skills and had some magic. Like some things is like they had faster gardening skills, and you know, these are things I think we could bring back if we got fairies. So I don't know though if these Sims, if we got fairies, if they would work on a 2-form system like some other occults. On one hand, I know there's some like kid shows about fairies who do that. So I definitely think there's that literature and media to dip into for inspiration. Like I don't see why you couldn't. I guess for me, my main thing is like when I think of fairies, I don't really think of them like living among us and then like they go into the woods and just turn into pixies, you know? But I mean, I'm not against the 2-form system as long as it feels worth it, because my main concern with adding fairies is making sure they don't feel like a weaker version of witches, you know, the spellcasters. That's one of my concerns with genies. But once you get more into fairies, you'll understand why I have a little bit more of this concern. So, because I was looking at, you know, fairies, and they're kind of harder to research in the sense that so many cultures spread over long periods of times and vast places. They all kind of have their own version of fairies, and there are some things that like overlap, but it comes down to, if you're gonna really do this, you're gonna have to either pick and choose or just pick one to really focus on. I do think there's some things about, you know, fairies that are generally accepted, I think, by when people think about them. Like, for when I think most people, when they think about them, they think of like a Tinkerbell, kind of like little pixie. They have maybe some kind of magic, and, you know, they have like little wings and are like little tricksters. So those are things I think, okay, we can bring that in. So I don't know though, because if we got them in the 2-form system, I don't know if they'd be able to shrink. That's definitely something I think the team could work on, and maybe they just have interactions that just work that way. But then the more I did some research, I was like, okay, it's getting a little bit more complicated. Like, in some mythologies, they're kind of seen more as like elementals or some kind of spirits, rather than like their own kind of race, if you know what I mean. Like, they're just kind of like spirits sometimes. Sometimes they're actually their own little race of little people. And the terms fae and fairy sometimes in some stories will encapsulate also like gnomes and trolls, you know? So like, it's sometimes they're just a race of little people with magic that includes some other little people with magic, and then sometimes they're spirits. You know, as I was thinking about this and trying to take my researches, once again, when we think of them, I often mostly think of just like little pixies, and I think that's what most people think of. But there's also some stories that kind of take influence from like Greco-Roman like nymphs and their ability to transform into like trees and plants, as well as there are some stories about fairies being able to turn into deer and some other kind of like woodland creatures. How do I think we could wrap them into The Sims 4 as I'm thinking all this? So if we do a 2-form system, I think they're going to have to once again work like mermaids, in the sense that they're not going to have a whole UI tree to buy perks from. However, I think with like mermaids and aliens, they'll have their own little interactions that are just for them, but I think they should have a boost in things like gardening, maybe in kind of mischief as well. I think some other things to think about, if they do have a second form, if they're able to shrink, give them some very specific animations and interactions that make shrinking worth it. But I don't think the default should be that they just shrink. I think when they turn in, they should have the ability, like one of their like interactions is to shrink. Another thing I was thinking about is like, what if we added them but didn't have them be playable Sims? Because I was thinking about, because we have those kind of like fairies from Discovery University that you get if you join the Secret Society. And I was like, okay, we could definitely work something like that in. Maybe they're just like these little people that you meet in the woods with some specific pack. And if you meet them, you know, there's maybe once again, there's like a chance that they'll like grant your wish and be your friend. There's also a chance that they'll just kind of play a trick on you, maybe. I think for me, that would be the version people would less be happy with, but I do think that's probably the easiest way to go. However, that doesn't mean it's the right way to go. So my ideal ones would work just like that, like mermaids and aliens. They get their little button with their interactions, and they get some cool buffs. And once again, I think this goes down to when I think of, you know, when I think of occults, I think of like the main, like most powerful ones being things like, you know, witches, vampires, and werewolves. So in my mind, it makes sense to give them a whole UI tree and perks and stuff to purchase from. And then when I think of other occults like mermaids, aliens, and, you know, fairies, I don't really think of them as being super powerful. I definitely think of them being more like on the lower end, like of the spectrum. You know, they ain't super powerful. So I think that's why I don't really think of them having a whole UI system. But but I do think we could give them very specific interactions and very specific roles in the game that would very also separate them but from other occults, but also make it worth playing them. For example, I think if you have, like if you make a fairy, the ability just to have that boost in like the gardening skill and mischief, I think would be worth it. And I think also having maybe very specific interactions, if you can shrink, would also be fun. And then, you know, so that's what I'm thinking there. For the next one, we are going to talk about zombies. So zombie was an odd life state in past Sims games. It usually was a temporary state, unless it was an NPC. And they were, at least in The Sims 3, they were introduced with Supernatural, and how it would work is you couldn't make one and create a Sim, but every night some NPCs would rise from like the graveyards and from the ground and would you know, go around. If your Sim got bit, they would be one until they got cured. So I think, you know, that's the basis, and I think that's, when I think of them, that's generally how I think of how they work. And then let's take a step back now, because that's The Sims. Let's take a step back and look at some research. One thing I found that was interesting is that the word zombie actually was first recorded in the English language in 1819. Interesting. The word zombie comes from Haitian folklore, and it is a reanimated corpse that is brought back through magic. The word zombie didn't really enter the American mainstream until the 20th century, though. And in the original Night of the Living Dead movie, the reanimated corpses are not referred to as zombies, but rather are referred to as ghouls. Which, fun fact, ghoul comes from the Arabic word for demon. Little fun trivia there. There are some medieval accounts in like medieval Europe and stuff that talk about corpse reanimating, but they're never referred to as zombies, since again, wasn't in our dialect, as well as these dead rising from the grave aren't usually associated with kind of like the proto zombie. They're not really seen as like the inspiration for modern zombie movies, but rather these often are seen as proto vampires, kind of like the myths that would later in the Victorian period turn into vampires. And it wasn't actually until 1978 in Dawn of the Dead that the reanimated corpses were referred to as zombies. And this film is often credited as being a big change of how that word was used in American mainstream, because it was really shifting zombies away from their voodoo and Haitian hoodoo background and stripping them of that magical connotation and bringing them into a slightly different idea with the general public, if that makes sense. So we're going to take a step back again, and we're going to focus really on Haitian voodoo and like the African roots of zombies. Because in Haitian belief, the idea of the zombie is kind of related to some African mythology. And it was this idea that if you offended certain deities, you would come back as an undead slave. These stories became very popular during the transatlantic slave route, as people were literally being taken away from their homes and were becoming slaves to another race of people. And we see that when they get to Haiti, and there's establishing a population there, and there's this, and within the Haiti population, there's like the voodoo and their own deities that kind of come from these African roots. We see once again this idea of zombies and this idea of enslavement become hand in hand. A little bit later, zombies become really associated with magic and the idea of using voodoo and using these kind of magical beliefs to raise the dead. And like I said before, even in American films prior to Dawn of the Dead, anytime zombies were used, they were either directly related to Haitian voodoo or magic, or some other kind of magic. Some of these examples include movies like White Zombie and Revolt of the Zombies. After that, we got a few other movies where zombies were removed from their Haitian roots and became less magical. During the 80s, though, zombies did begin to fade from the kind of like general American interest. There were a few movies here and there, and once again, these generally did not have any connection with that voodoo Haitian background. Really, they said sayonara. We then see again in the like kind of late 90s and early 2000s, there's kind of this interest in zombies once again. We see this in some things like Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island, as well as the Resident Evil video game franchise. However, we see once again with this new resurgence comes an interest in trying to understand different ideas of how zombies work. In Scooby-Doo and the Zombie Island film, they're more interested once again in that idea of like magic, maybe even kind of like voodoo-esque ideas. I mean, they have voodoo dolls in that movie, so they're pretty on the nose if you ask me. The Resident Evil game franchise, however, took a different route and was interested in the idea of zombies and this idea of kind of like viruses and them being caused through a virus, which is very interesting. Once again, a very different approach. So with this boom in zombies once again, kind of came this also the counterculture, the reactionary, and we got things like Shaun of the Dead and some other parody films, as well as then we got Warm Bodies, which is a romance film. I guess if you can date vampires, why not zombies? But anyways, moving on. We also see, though, partially due to the success of the Resident Evil game and movie franchise, then comes this idea of like the zombie apocalypse. We see this coming into media with things such as World War Z and The Walking Dead. It's this idea that the zombie infection could lead into this like pandemic that causes the like apocalypse and like the like fall of man. And, you know, it's an interesting idea. Once again, it's very different from its original roots, but it's interesting to see this kind of road that zombies went on. Zombies, as you know, you probably don't need me to tell you, but they're generally seen as like rotting corpses, which are somehow oddly strong for despite the fact that they're just rotting. So how would zombies work in The Sims 4? I'm thinking we're going to go with The Sims 3 idea, and they're going to be a temporary state that can be cured. However, I would like to see some kind of introduction of some other things, but we'll get into that in a minute. I'm a little worried that we might not get zombies in The Sims 4, solely just because we didn't get them with Realm of Magic, and that probably would have been the best pack to get them in. However, though, I will be honest, I can live without zombies. I think that just has to do with me personally, since I know like how bodies decay. I'm just kind of like, they're not that scary. Which is, I'm like really into skeletons in The Sims 4, like the skeletons from Jungle Adventure and the skeleton, you know, everyone's favorite skeleton maid, Bonehilda, who we still don't have. But yeah, zombies, I mean, they're not scary. I do think if we got them, it could add a bit of chaos. And I will never turn down chaos in The Sims 4, because I'm wondering if they could work like The Sims 3, where there's like a time at night they just kind of rise from the dead. And if your sim gets bit, then, well, they're gonna become one. In my ideal world, you wouldn't be able to make one create a sim. There wouldn't be like a 2 form. But one thing I think that could be added that would be interesting is adding a different kind of countdown, similar to the one we got with Poison in Jungle Adventure. So how it would work in this though is there's going to be a countdown, and this countdown is once you've been bitten and you've turned into a zombie, and the countdown is until your sim just like decays and is gone and dead. And so my idea for it is your sim, if they get bit, and you know, maybe they'll get a countdown from then until they turn, and then once they turn they get a new countdown, maybe a few days or something, and that countdown, when it's done, they're dead. That way you just don't have a zombie in your household for, I don't, maybe you're into that, but I think it could add some actual gameplay. Like then you're like, okay, so I need to get my sim saved or you're dead, sorry. I mean, I think it could just be fun to explore that idea. This idea that your sim wants to be saved, I don't know. Or if they're not saved in time, they just decay and die. My main idea is you get these NPCs that just rise, and if you have cemetery, like headstones on a lot, whether you have them on a community lot, whether or not they're just like the decor items or like actual headstones from families, you know, it could be on your lot, or if you're visiting a lot that has one on it, whether it be community or someone else's family lot, if you're out at the right time, and you know, maybe they could spawn anytime between midnight and like 3 a.m. or something, and if your sim just happens to be out then and there just happens to be a zombie, there's a chance they'll get bit. Since it's The Sims 4, I think the chance of them getting bit would probably be less likely. That's just how it kind of works, but I think it'd still be a nice added kind of chaos that I think would be fun. You know, you're just bippity-boppiting on your way home after leaving, I don't know. You left the club and you're in your neighborhood, just kind of walking, and then a zombie's just like, "Arr," and bites you, and then you're like, oh. Then you get a countdown, and then you become one. I'm assuming they would just look very similar to the ones in The Sims 3. You know, a little gross, a little green. I think that's fine. I'm not super invested in zombies, I'll be honest. But like I said, if we got them, I will happily take them. We need more chaos. We're gonna get a little controversial, and I do apologize ahead of time. We're gonna talk about mummies. Hey everyone, this next segment is going to discuss the process of mummification, as well as looking at some light imagery of mummified bodies. These images may be triggering to certain people and audiences, so please go on with caution. If you are uncomfortable with this next topic, here is a timestamp that you can go to skip this part of the video. All right, thank you, and let's get into it. I'm gonna say it, I don't want mummies in The Sims 4. Or, I don't want to say I don't want them, I'm concerned. And that's because I actually have a love for mummies. I love it. That sounds weird, I know. Let me try to explain. I think the process of mummification, whether it be intentional or accidental, you know, naturally occurring mummies are so cool. I bet you're seeing like, how do you naturally or like unintentionally mummify? It's so cool, you have to look it up. Naturally occurring mummies, they're so cool. And also just the mummification process is so interesting. However, there's something to keep in mind with mummies in that they're so culturally specific, kind of like Jinn, in the sense that I am a little worried about bringing them in. And that's because mummies as a supernatural creature have never really interested me. I don't know, there's just something about the idea of mummies rising from the dead in like Egyptian tombs specifically, that just feels really dated and not relevant anymore. I don't know. It just also, I feel like feeds into this idea that a lot of like of those movies that had that idea, then people made those movies that saw, you know, Egyptian culture as like this something very foreign and exotic and weird and mystical. I don't know. Not super into it, but I will talk about the history of mummification because I'm super into it. And hopefully me explaining it and talking about kind of some parts in history where it gets a little dicey, that you might understand why I'm hesitant to bring mummies into The Sims 4. We're going to start off with my favorite mummies, and that are the mummies that come out of the Atacama Desert in South America. So Atacama Desert is this desert that has areas that are so uninhabitable that bodies will actually naturally mummify there. It's so uninhabitable that bodies do not decay. That's crazy to me. The Inca and some other local pre-Columbian cultures in this area near the Atacama Desert would bring their dead here to mummify. Originally, as we can see with the mummies, a lot of the earlier ones, they would do what you would normally do in natural mummification processes, where you remove the organs from the cavity of the body and try to dry out the skin, because how you mummify a body and preserve what you can is you need to remove all the moisture. So mummies need to be devoid of moisture. But like I said, it's so uninhabitable in parts of the Atacama Desert that mummies or bodies will naturally mummify even if you do not take out the cavity. And we see with some later mummies from these cultures that they don't take out those elements. So then you have mummies that have like everything intact, and it's so cool and interesting. Another cool fact about the Atacama Desert, if you're wondering like how uninhabitable it could be, they test the Mars rovers there. That's how bad it is. It is so awful, but I love it. In the Egyptian practice, because if we're getting mummies, let's be honest, they're probably like 100% going to be based off of Egyptian mummies. And I think that's what most people think of when they think of mummies. In the Egyptian process, I know a little bit more about the cultural reasons about it, and I know quite a bit about how you mummify. Weirdly enough, I learned it in Latin class. So in the Egyptian process, mummification was done by, like I said, removing the internal organs and using like a salt-like substance to dry out the skin. And then you would put packets of this salt-like substance in the cavity of the body to help dry it out. And that's after you take everything out. The organs that are removed are put into jars to be preserved. However, there's one organ that's left in the body. It's technically not the heart, technically a muscle, but in their idea of organs, it was an organ and they left it. And that's because it was believed that that's where like a lot of like you as a human is. And as you may or may not know, they would pick out the brain through the nose in a very weird, I'm glad I wasn't there to see that. I think I would gag. But the body, like I said, it's totally dried out. And then once it's very dry, like there's no moisture left, the priest would lightly wash down the body with some like wet cloths, you know, just to remove excess salt and whatnot. And then they would fill the body with linen, and fake eyes would be placed in. This is to give it a more lifelike feel and not have it be like a deflated, eyeless body. The priests then would begin to wrap the bodies in strips of linen, and in between these layers they would apply a resin to help, you know, keep it all together. Another really cool thing is between the layers, they would put in amulets as well as prayers. And I think that's an idea that you see in some mummy movies, these ideas of like cursed amulets, when in reality they were put there to help like protect the body. Another cool thing that you may or may not find, I thought was cool in my research, because I actually didn't know this prior to this, was they would wrap individual fingers and toes and then wrap the whole hand as a whole. Did not know they did that. I thought that was super interesting. And they would do this, and then, you know, they would be put in a sarcophagus, and with that there are so many cool different practices between the different Egyptian periods and the ways they would decorate the sarcophagus. Super interesting, and it's, in my opinion, just very a really cool process. I think one thing to keep in mind here, though, is why did they do this? What was the reason? And it was because the ancient Egyptians believed that the body was the home to the soul, or your soul would turn into 3 souls. We're not going to get into that. There's a lot to get into. But essentially, your soul would live inside your body, and that's why they preserved it and would leave food and items within there for you, so you would essentially have them in your afterlife. And it was believed that if the body was destroyed, that the soul would become a lost soul. And you don't want to be a lost spirit just wandering the world, so that's why they mummified and preserved bodies. Another thing I'm just going to point out, there is, to my knowledge, at least one account of bodies being found preserved by being put into large jars of honey. Like I said, only one that I know of says this, so this probably didn't actually happen. But I mean, what if we got that in The Sims 4? Honey mummies. So there's this kind of interesting cultural tie there. Of course, modern Egyptian people don't believe that anymore. So, you know, bringing in mummies won't be super problematic. But that's one of the things I think about, is when we have like these cursed mummies and those ideas, where they come from. It to me just feels very, I don't know, feeds into ideas that are kind of no longer seen as appropriate or correct. Another type of mummification I do want to talk about is a group of, like an ethnic group in Indonesia, the Toraja people. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's Toraja. These people mummify their dead, and, you know, they do it in, you know, the way you mummify them everywhere. But you would mummify them, and once a year you actually remove them from their tombs to redress them, gussy them up, you know, clean up the mummification. And the reason they did this, or still do this, is because they believe in their culture that once someone dies, their spirit doesn't leave their body automatically. Rather, it's a very slow process that happens gradually over years. So what you do is you take the body out, you freshen it up, you make it nice and clean, and then it goes back in its tomb. During the time where it's out, you like have it in your home. It's very different than what we're used to here in the West. I know some people, I'm explaining this, they're going to be like, what the heck? But I bring this up because I really want to drive the point home. Mummification is a very, like, personal, I guess, aspect of many cultures. Like I said, these come from personal kind of cultures and stuff. And then there's a really problematic history we also have to address, that here in the Western world, in like America and Western Europe, in the 19th century, it was very common, because during this time, you know, there was a lot of, you know, archaeology happening, a lot also in Egypt, and a lot of Egyptian mummies were being taken out of tombs and being brought to, you know, institutions and museums across Europe and America. And the things that were going on with these mummies, of now by today's standards, within kind of like anthropology and archaeology and art history, we would consider these things very inappropriate. But some things that were going on is that they would grind mummies up to create a paint pigment known as mummy brown. So that happened, as well as they would consume mummy pieces, and it was believed to have kind of like healing medicine kind of aspects to it as well. Some people consumed it hoping it would work as an aphrodisiac. I don't know about you, but something about eating mummified people doesn't really feel like it's gonna help you get laid, but you know, the Victorians were weird. And then another thing that happened, one example I can think of specifically happening in Boston, where I live near, is a curator or anthropologist, kind of like archaeologist person, decided to unwrap a mummy publicly, remove its head and hold it up to everyone and say that this was the skull of a white man, to try to prove that Egyptians had to be white if they were going to have such a great and important civilization. So there's a lot to unpack here. So these are the things I'm thinking about when I'm like, okay, are we going to bring mummies into The Sims 4? And I think one thing to think about is, I guess we could do them similar to how they were done in World Adventures. And that's in the sense that they work a lot like the skeletons from Jungle Adventure, in the sense that they're these NPCs that if you use cheats, you can add to your household, but you know, they don't exist anywhere else other than these specific areas, and you can't create one in Create a Sim. And you know, they kind of just chase you around and stuff. And maybe you could have like a cool fight with them or something, but you know, I think if we're going to do this, we're going to have to go in the same vein that Jungle Adventure did. And that is, Jungle Adventure is inspired by Mesoamerican cultures such as the Aztecs and the Maya and the Olmec and other, those kind of like pre-Columbian as it's sometimes referred to, but these Mesoamerican cultures. There wasn't one specific culture it was really based off of, which, to be fair, a lot of them do have a lot of similarities across the board with really great nuanced differences, however. And there wasn't one specific that was based off of, which really did a good job at making it feel less problematic. Because in The Sims 3, we had 3 worlds with our destination world pack, which was called World Adventures. I personally have problems with World Adventure. Number one being, I don't like in the Sims franchise when you have specific worlds that are based off of other worlds. For example, there was a France, kind of like a Paris world you could go to, and there's like the Eiffel Tower and stuff. There was an Egyptian world where you could go and explore the pyramids, as well as then there was a, I believe, Chinese world. Yeah, because they had the Great Wall of China and stuff. So I prefer it more in The Sims 4, where it's not specifically referencing one culture, and it's just like inspired by, rather being, we're just gonna make it and put it into The Sims. Because when you do it that way, it just kind of feels hollow, and I don't know, it feels bad in my opinion. So if we're gonna get mummies, I think they're gonna have to work in the sense that they're like the skeletons from Jungle Adventure, and I think we could get them in some kind of world that's inspired by Egyptian culture and architecture, as well as it can incorporate some of the other cultures that run down the Nile River that also built pyramids and mummified their dead, but that weren't specifically part of that Egyptian world, like the Nubian culture. Like there's a few other ones that run down the Nile that did similar things like the Egyptians that I think could also be incorporated. And that way it gives you a little bit more of a fleshed out experience, as well as it doesn't, I don't know, just don't call it Egypt when we get that pack. Next on the agenda is Bigfoot. Does anyone remember Bigfoot from the Sims game, like the OG Sims game? Let's bring him back. I know there's like a Yeti costume, but like, let's have an NPC that's literally just Bigfoot. I know everyone wants like a skiing pack, and I'm like, just throw him into that. So for people who don't remember, Bigfoot was this NPC, or if you didn't play the first Sims game, he was like this NPC, and like you'd have like, I don't remember what his first name was, but his last name was Bigfoot. And after he died, there'd be another Bigfoot, and the only thing in common with them is that all of their last names were Bigfoot, and it was great. You could add him to your household, and he but he didn't really do any, like, he was just a sim who was Bigfoot. You couldn't woohoo with him, so I think if we're gonna get him, let's have the ability to woohoo, because I want to use him in the 100 baby challenge. I will be honest. I'm a terrible human. And he can literally work like in the first Sims game where, I don't know, his first name could just be like generic, I don't know, Harold, and his last name Bigfoot. And then when he dies, the next Bigfoot's his last name Bigfoot. You know, I think that could be really fun. And I think it's stuff like that, if they add, that just adds a little bit more fun, kind of like chaos to the game. And I think him, and if you added a few other, you know, like cryptids, like maybe one inspired by the Loveland Frogman or something. Or one that's really like the Fresno Nightcrawlers. Those are so stupid. Let's have those in the game. And I think it could be something like, you have a very small chance of seeing them, and it depends where you are. Like, let's say, I don't know, you're camping or something, or you're just out in one of the worlds that have trees and kind of like a foresty area, like those kind of like areas behind the homes in Newcrest, maybe. You're just maybe out there at the right time, and he just like waltzes by, and you can try to talk to him, but you might scare him off. And then if you get one that's like the Loveland Frogman, maybe you're just like fishing, and it can be in any world, and he might come out of the water and run away. And like, once again, you can try to talk to him, but there's a higher chance you'll scare him off. And they could work very similar to the sea monster from Get Together, in the sense that it is like very rare that you're going to see them. But when you do, it's just kind of like, oh, hey. But like, I want you to be able to interact, because you can't interact with the sea monster. The sea monster also, if you pause your game and like go close up, looks like shit. So let's not have them look like that. Sorry to the Sims team. Some other kind of like cryptids I think we could get, if we ever get horses, you know, like maybe in a farming pack, why not throw unicorns in too? That could be fun. That's what people want. They want unicorns. You know, I just think it'd be fun to have like some random NPC cryptids running about. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about today, I don't really know if it counts as a supernatural occult kind of sim. I'm going to wrap it in there because I think the Wikipedia page also does too. So if we ever get a Generations-esque type pack for The Sims 4, let's bring back imaginary friends. I personally hated them in The Sims 3. I thought they were terrifying. They're nightmarish. And I know some people say that they don't think we'll get a Sims, like a Generations pack, because of Parenthood. But to that I say, Parenthood just focuses on like parenting. And in my opinion, I don't think The Sims 3 Generations really encapsulated parenting at all. So I think this could be a good pack that they could like complement each other. That would be nice. So, you know, I think we can get a Sims 3 Generations pack. And if, you know, when we do, because I do think we will, I believe we could get the imaginary friends back and all the nightmares that fueled for me. I hate them. But I hate them also because if they grow up, you can woohoo them. I just hate it. I hate it so much. But it could be fun to have those back. So let's quickly talk packs before I wrap up here, because this video is getting quite long. I do apologize. And I feel like maybe fairies and unicorns could come in some kind of game pack that's focusing on fantasy. I know this would probably mean horses would have to come with this pack, so I do apologize. But I'm thinking, some idea I had is this could be a fantasy pack that's kind of oriented for more like kid and teen gameplay. Of course, I think it could be compatible with all ages, because I think one of the main focuses of this pack could be Renaissance fairs. And you get like a new lot type that's just like Renaissance fair, and you have the ability to build a very the Renaissance fair of your dream. And when your Sims go there, they like come in like a outfit which you can either design, or when you get there, pick a new one out or whatever. And I think this pack could be super fun, just because like we could get things like jousting, we could get you know, fairies and unicorns, and that's maybe only kids can see them or something. I don't know, I just think it'd be fun because once it would give us more things for kids and teens to do, as well as I just think like having the ability to go to a Renaissance fair brings in so much more gameplay, such as like juggling. It could bring in like the ability to work at one. It could be even like an active career, and you could work at, oh my god, that'd be so fun. And you could like work your way up to being like the king or something. I'm just saying, I think that could be a fun system. And you know, you just have like so many cool things at Renaissance fairs that I think could be wrapped up into The Sims 4 and bring a lot more fun in. We already kind of talked about mummies, but once again, mummies should come in some kind of game pack. I don't want it to be a destination world, but I think if they're gonna do an Egyptian inspired world, it would work best this way. I just wish destination worlds like were livable, because it feels a little problematic to be like, this world where people still live in and still like enjoy parts of that culture. Yep, you can't live there though. That's how I mostly feel about, I guess really only so far with Jungle Adventure, because like there are contemporary Maya people who go to these ancient Maya sites to actually like do old cultural rituals and like religious rites. So a little weird we can't live there, but could have been avoided if the Sims team would just hire me. Mummies, Egyptian inspired world, work like skeletons, they chase you or whatever. It'd be really fun to bring in pyramids and be able to go there and check them out, and they could work similar to Jungle Adventure, where you have to solve maybe different puzzles. But I want the main gameplay of this to not be like Jungle Adventure, where in the sense like you're going there to find things. Maybe the main goal of this could be to return things. I think that could be a fun twist on the idea, just because Jungle Adventure is all like, I'm gonna go into this foreign land and steal things. That's been the history for Europe and America for a very long time. Especially when you think about the largest collection of Maya vases. Guess where that is? If your guess was anywhere in Central America, you would be wrong. The largest collection of Maya vases is in Boston at the Museum of Fine Arts. They also keep them in the basement. Anyways, so I think a kind of twist on that could be actually trying to return certain items. I do feel bad because then it would probably have to be a little bit more story or mission oriented. I know a lot of people want less of those, but I mean, that's how World Adventures worked, and all of you loved that stupid pack. So, but once again, I think the goal could maybe to be returning artifacts rather than stealing them. Or if they want to, I don't know, bring in some stupid mummy's curse, trying to undo the curse or whatever. I don't know. I just feel like they can't just go in, find items, and bring them home. I just don't think, because I feel like people like this is just Jungle Adventure, but in Egypt. So I think if we could have a twist there, maybe the gameplay like is slightly different. I don't know. And like I said, great opportunity to get like Egyptian architectural elements. The next one we can talk about are Jinn and or genies, whatever they decide to call them in this pack. I don't know. My idea is I want this pack to be in a Middle Eastern kind of inspired world, looking more at like Iran or Saudi Arabia. We could get some beautiful Arabian architecture elements. I think that could be super nice. Some new like roofed like types and some new roof ornaments. I really think we could get some really beautiful Islamic elements here, as well as I think some of the clothing we could get would be really nice. Like I know we already have one like hijab in the game, but if we could get more, I think that'd be really nice. And I think just having this kind of like Iranian or Persian inspired architecture, or more specific like Arabian, but you know, with that like Islamic, Muslim kind of like twist there. I don't know, I think that could be really beautiful, and I think having a world inspired would also be really nice. But I think, what would the main like gameplay of this pack be? And I'm thinking we could do something like resorts, and that being, we have this beautiful like world, and you know, and I think you could try to work it similar. So how my dream pack for island living, how it would have worked is the main focus would have been resorts, and then all the other gameplay features tie in somehow. So in this one, you know, maybe finding different artifacts, or you know, or there might be a market, for example, that you can go to, and if you know, running this market and keeping this market, like, I don't know, stocked or whatever, would be a good incentive for like visitors to come here, because then they have things to do. And maybe at these markets you have the ability to buy a lamp that have genies in them. Boom, there it is. And then there's some other features that I'm not going to go into right now, because we're not going to talk about just that pack. But main feature, resorts. One of the offshoots is there is an area full of little street vendors, and there's the ability to, at this street vendor, to purchase a lamp with a genie in it. And I think it would be fun, like maybe it's 50-50 and you buy this lamp and there's nothing in it. That could be funny. Zombies are one that I've been trying to think, like if they're going to come in some kind of game or stuff pack. I think game pack would work better for what I'm thinking. And this whole game pack could be focused around the idea of being like supernatural careers. And I think it could come with 2 careers. And one actually could work as a skill versus career, but I would prefer maybe to work as both. And that would be a fortune teller. And with that, we could get like it'd be like a whole like psychic medium kind of fortune teller kind of thing. I'm thinking where we could get a what's it called, a seance table, and we get like crystal balls, and your whole thing is you're trying to conjure the spirits or whatever. All I want to do in The Sims 4 is be able to play as a boardwalk fortune teller. Is that too much to ask for? And these are the things I need. And then the other career within, I'm thinking this one could actually be an active career, and it'd be like one of those ones where like you can send them to work or you could follow them. And that would be a supernatural hunter. And of course, since killing in The Sims doesn't work, the aspect would be trying to cure different occults. And I would think this would have great like kind of like cross-pack compatibility if you have some other packs, like if you have vampires. And what I'm thinking is, because the main new occult that would come with this pack are zombies, and with this kind of like supernatural hunter, they would come with a cure for zombies. And you go and you hunt down the zombies, you throw the cure on them or whatever, as long as it's within the time frame. And if it's a sim that's been bit, then you cure them. If they're an NPC kind of sim that just rose from like a graveyard or whatever, if you throw the cure on them, they just kind of like fall back into the ground or whatever, disintegrate, who cares? Doesn't really matter. They're NPCs. They don't get cured. Because that's kind of how they worked in The Sims 3. I don't remember if you could cure the zombies ones, that the NPCs, they would just go back into the ground if you defeated them or whatever. I believe if I remember correctly, there was like a special edition version of Supernatural that had like the ability to fight zombies or whatever. So I'm thinking it could work something like that. You just go around and you're fighting zombies. It's like, that's like the main thing. But with, and then also since ghosts come in the base game, there would also be the ability to find ghosts and, you know, ghost bust them. And I think this could also be a good part to bring in like the psychic medium kind of thing I want, or maybe the psychic medium is trying to conjure them. Once again, this could maybe work better as a skill, but you can't really make money off of that, I guess, which is sad. Maybe you could charge people for a seance or whatever, I don't know. But you try to conjure the dead, and then you just speak with them. But then the ghost hunter or supernatural hunter career would try to like exorcise them, or it could even work just kind of like ghost, like the ghost hunter movies, Ghostbuster movies, sorry, where they just like suck them up into a vacuum or whatever. We already have that animation here anyways. You could just use the animation from Eco Lifestyle. I think that could be fine. With some other cross pack, but if you have vampires, because there's a cure to vampirism, that's like a drink you make, you could go around and just cure vampires if you have that pack. I don't know how it would work with spellcasters, because with spellcasters, there's like a spell that has to be cast. So who knows how that would work? So something to think about, I guess. I guess maybe that could be one that's like not affected by this pack. And then also like mermaid, like who's out here trying to like cure mermaids? I don't know. And then aliens, like what are you gonna do? Just go find them and be like, you have to leave? I just feel like that would be. But another great selling part or feature of this pack though, because you know there's another thing we're missing, is Bonehilda. She could just be in this pack and I think it would be fine. Of course, maybe we could also get the trait Supernatural Skeptic again. And I just think it could just be fun. I feel like this pack is like the one I would be most excited for, because all I want is like that kind of psychic medium skill or career, and have a ghost or you know supernatural hunting career that has a lot of good cross compatibility. And you could just like have, it could literally work just like or similar to the detective career from Get to Work, in the sense that you go to a site, you have to try to maybe find, depending on what it is, if it's a vampire, zombie, or ghost, or maybe like I said, you could even fit in other occults this way too. Maybe you don't cure them, but maybe you like, I don't know, arrest them or yell at them, write them a citation, I don't know. You go there and you try to figure out, okay, what's the supernatural issue? What is going on next? You know, you find the clues, and then you find them, and then you, I don't know, if it's a ghost, you suck them up with your vacuum. If they're a vampire, you throw a cure at them. If they're, you know, a witch, a spellcaster, maybe you're just like, naughty, naughty. you know, or zombie, you cure them, you know. I think this could be a very fun pack. And I think within the restrictions of like not adding violence, this could be fun. So anyways, these are my ideas. I do apologize, not one of these ideas have I gone as in-depth as I did with my werewolf video. These are all kind of like basic. If there's anyone you would like me to go further with, let me know down below. But the main reason these are kind of in a big video like this, rather having their own, is I don't think all of these really deserve their own video. Like the ones I think maybe I could really go into depth about would maybe be Jinn, maybe mummies, and then maybe this last one, zombies, I talked about. But even then, I feel like it'd be less focused on the occult types and just more like of the pack I can think I would like to see them in and going in depth. Because once again, I don't think any of these is anywhere as interesting as the other occults that I would like and the other ones we have. Like zombies, I don't see them having any kind of powers or anything. I would see them having limited interactions. If your sim became one, just kind of like arg and eat brains, you know, like very basic like interactions, and you don't really do anything with them. I feel like if anything, they're just more annoying. Which, you know, we need some annoyance. So let me know down below if these are things you're interested in. Let me know which ones you like, which ones that I came with that you don't like. Let me know if there's any other supernatural creatures or occults you would like me to talk about. If you would like me, I can do another video like this, or if you'd like me to flesh out any of these a little bit further, I'm totally fine with doing that. I like doing these kind of like videos because they're a lot more fun. For me, they allow me to do kind of like research, as well as I don't know. It's fun. So anyways, let me know down below what you're thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.